I'm Harold Reed, 62, and I'm still reeling from what my own son just did. After 3 decades crawling through attics as a retired HVAC foreman who built a plain, decent life off South Congress in Austin, I figured I'd earned a little respect. Last Tuesday, Evan sent me an invoice for $200,000 to fund his wedding and honeymoon, while informing me I wasn't welcome at the ceremony. At the bottom, he added, "Be grateful to help from the bottom." I set the bill beneath a worn manila folder, picked up my drafting pencil, and drew one clean line through every image package and press placement they expected me to bankroll. That night I didn't rage or plead. I poured coffee, opened my notebook, and wrote the only rule that mattered. No public respect, no money. Before I tell you how the rest of this played out, tell me where you're watching in from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach someone that respect cannot be purchased. That afternoon, sunlight pooled like honey across my kitchen table as I slid open a cream-colored envelope. Inside was a stack of invoices, and the number hit me like a rock to the chest: $200,000 for a wedding and a honeymoon. At the bottom, a neat little note, sharp as a fingernail tap: "Be grateful to help from the bottom." The sender was my son, Evan. No dad, no please, no thank you. Just a figure and an order. A few minutes earlier, a message from his fiancée, Brooke Caldwell, had told me I didn't need to attend so the visuals wouldn't be disrupted. I closed my eyes for a beat and drew a long breath. Then I slid the bill under the frayed edge of a manila folder. My drafting pencil sat by my graph paper notebook, waiting. I started striking lines through image packages, media coordination, exclusive interviews, press placements, the way you cut a tired wire from a circuit. In my head, arrows snapped into place. Without public respect, not $1 moves. I called Evan first. His voice was slippery and rushed, like a fish that just hit the net. "Dad, don't make this a thing. This is the minimum standard for my future." I didn't argue. I said, "Tomorrow, Zilker Park." Then I sent Brooke one short text. "No public respect, no budget. The father of the groom is not a prop." I set the phone down, washed a cup, put on a pot of coffee. Steam lifted in patchy clouds. I slid the pot aside, wiped the table dry, opened my notebook, and clipped the bill inside. It had been a long time since my mind felt this level. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I finally saw exactly where the fracture ran. The next morning, while I was jotting a few lines in the notebook, emails began to land like mist. The run of show in a full set of program notes. Every minute slotted like components on a board. Guest arrival, opening song, bride's family portraits, then the people who made the groom who he is, which turned out to be co-workers and event sponsors. A line item for toast said, "No segment allocated to father of the groom." Another note made me sit up straighter. "Workwear attire of father does not meet aesthetic. Seat him far from cameras." I glanced at the brown cotton shirt on my hook, the one I wore when I checked neighbors' HVAC units. Old, yes. Clean, too. I let out a small laugh. Maybe the smell of real work doesn't pair with the perfume of wedding photos. The phone buzzed. Brooke wrote, "Mr. Reed, hope you understand. This is a visual matter. Your role doesn't align with our media plan. Your financial support is already so appreciated." I replied, "I'll show up if I'm treated as a father. Otherwise, not a dollar. Take care." Around noon, I stopped by the little market I frequent and bought tomatoes, herbs, and a shoulder roast. The owner asked, "Mr. Reed, you coming by to celebrate this weekend?" I smiled and sidestepped. "Save me a few pretty tomatoes. My stew needs color." On the way home, I paused under a tree and watched the young leaves throw their shadows across the pavement. I thought of Ruth, my wife, who used to tell me, "Don't let anybody teach you to be ashamed of sweat." I'd come home dusty and smelling of oil, and she'd set a plate in front of me, say that, and take my hand. Back at the house, I put the groceries on the counter, scrubbed my hands, and looked in the mirror. Stiff gray hair, sun-browned face, eyes lined with tired. I asked myself what Ruth would say if she were still here. Probably this: be calm, stand up straight. By mid-afternoon, the grass at Zilker Park glowed like gold under the sun. The big flag eased in the breeze. Kids chased each other, dry leaves crackling under their shoes. Evan was 10 minutes late. He hugged me the way a man hugs when he's worried someone might see. I felt his heart racing through his shirt. I didn't call him on it. I just asked, "Do you want to get married or do you want to put on a show?" He dropped his eyes. Brooke already lined up press. They said if the look stays consistent, the article will be great. This is my shot. I let him empty it all out. The lines he'd learned, the ones he'd stuffed in his own mouth to make it easier to swallow. Then I set a hand on his shoulder. My palm is calloused, his shoulders narrow. Opportunity doesn't start with erasing your father from the picture. People respect you only when you respect yourself. He sighed. Don't make this harder, Dad. I need it to go smoothly. I nodded. I'll come to rehearsal. I won't make a scene. I just want to see how people treat the two of us. Riverside Gardens in the late day looked like a glass box full of light. Garlands hung in arches, white ribbons moved like small waves. Heels clicked softly across the floor. Cameras flashed in steady rhythm. But it didn't feel like a rehearsal. It felt like a lookbook shoot. A fast-moving crew fanned out. The media lead barked, "Faster, smile, eyes up." Brooke floated in wearing a trial dress, face finished to the last eyelash. She spotted me at the entrance, slid me a thin smile. "You made it?" "We're slammed. Maybe stand out of frame." Before I could answer, she turned and said to a man in a black suit with an earpiece, "Call security. Don't let him dirty the shot." I heard that word, dirty, like a heel grinding down. The man came toward me, polite but firm. "Sir, we'll need you to wait in the guest area." I kept my voice even. "Why?" Brooke didn't bother. She pivoted, planted a sentence in front of everyone. "Don't let the smell of a mechanic's work shirt make it into the wedding photos." A few women covered their mouths. Eyes went wide. I looked at Evan. He hovered behind the crew, tried to shape a word, then stepped back. I slid the guest badge off my neck, laid it on the welcome table, and said clear enough for the room, "If I'm not treated like a father, not $1 goes to any of this." Then I turned and walked out. Behind me, the strobes kept popping. I hadn't reached the parking lot when Brooke caught up. Her voice dropped to a friendly whisper. "Mr. Reed, we can work something out. We've got a father presence package, 2 minutes at the mic, 1 pose family frame, 50,000 more. Don't jeopardize Evan's future." She leaned in. Her perfume was cool and sharp. I looked her in the eye. "Thanks, I won't buy the right to be a father." She frowned, shifted her weight, and went for the old pressure point. "Evan says his career's about to take off. This feature matters. You're ruining it." I didn't answer. I scanned the room for my son so I could tell him with my eyes that I was still here. But Evan had folded into the planning team, hands in his pockets, gaze pinned to the floor. I opened my car door and rested my hands on the wheel for a long moment before turning the key. In the rear view, her hair flashed white in the sun like a little flag that wasn't written for me. That night, the AC hummed low. I scrolled past bright, empty squares on social media. The media team's page showed Brooke in white with a caption, "Family is the people who support the vision." I understood. That sentence had no room for a father. Close to midnight, Evan texted, "Dad, I'm stuck. I told them to put you in the frame. They refused. I said if you're out, I won't sign anything." Brooke said, "Then you're ruining your future." I leaned back and set the phone on my chest like a paperweight over a restless heart. Finally, I wrote, "Your future belongs to you. Come early tomorrow. I don't need promises. I need to see you choose." By Saturday morning, the Austin Botanical Conservatory was a giant greenhouse, moisture beating on leaves, sun cutting long angles through the glass. I got there 10 minutes early and stood at the entrance, hands in my pockets, eyes on the white columns. Guests trickled in. The man at the list looked at me and shook his head. Your name's not here. I smiled. I'm the groom's father. He radioed, uncomfortable. Brooke came out, voice as soft as a freshly pressed scarf, eyes as cold as a pane of glass. Mr. Reed, today is intimate. We're at capacity. Please don't create stress for Evan on a delicate day. Evan stepped out from the hall. When he saw me, he paused half a beat, like a man who spots shore after a bad swim. Dad! Brooke snapped her head and signaled the sound tech. I heard a whisper. Ready for speeches. Cut the mic if he mentions his father. I lifted my chin. I wasn't here to fight. I was here to listen. The mic guy zigzagged through the white chairs. Light bounced off his shirt. Brooke pushed Evan into place, her hand pressing his shoulder like she was straightening a prop. As the MC started, Evan put his hand up for the mic. Brooke flashed a smile and a hard look. The volume dipped like someone turning a valve. Evan didn't wait. He took the microphone and, hoarse but clear as a hammer strike, said, If my dad isn't in this, there isn't a wedding. Feedback squealed and died. Heads turned. At me, at Brooke, at Evan. Brooke froze a heartbeat, then anger snapped through. She fired an arrow of a question. Do you choose that old mechanic or your future? A murmur rippled through the room. An older woman bent to whisper to her neighbor. Evan exhaled, slow, like a man lowering weight off his back. I choose my family and the truth. He walked to the backdrop, grabbed a leg, and pushed. The sweet words on the wall toppled with a thud. Flowers hit the floor like sudden rain. I didn't move. My hands shook in my pockets. My eyes stung. We left to a chorus of whispers and quick footsteps on tile. The corridor was cool and smelled like green things. Brooke stayed at the doorway. She didn't use his name. She used a label. You're wrecking a media-grade event. Evan didn't turn. I'm not doing media. I'm trying to be a husband. Those are not the same job. Outside, little flags along the path fluttered in the wind. Evan set his palm on the hood of my car and stared at the sky for a long minute. Then he said quietly, I'm scared, Dad. I answered, You just did the hard thing. People fear hard, not right. He nodded. Lunch? I asked. He gave a tired smile. Yeah. The diner on the corner still lined up white ceramic coffee pots along the counter. Butter melting on toast opened a door in the chest. Evan looked from his plate to me. I'm sorry I let them tell you to stand outside the frame. I shook my head. Don't apologize for someone else's wrong. Just remember, respect isn't a lighting effect. He nodded, pulled out his phone, and dialed. On the other end, I could hear the rush of pleading, threats, and circles that led back to themselves. Evan spoke one nail-hard sentence. The ceremony is off. Please don't contact me again. He ended the call and set the phone face down. A bicycle zipped past the window, its bell chiming like a period. That afternoon, I wrote one message to the family. The ceremony is off due to a values mismatch. We're all right. I chose the word values because anger burns fast, but values stay put. That evening, I rehung Ruth's photo on the wall. The last light of the day slid along the wood frame and caught the top of her hair like a tiny crown. I said softly, You see that? He chose. In the days that followed, aftershocks came from odd corners. Strangers texted to call me stubborn and to say I'd ruined my son's future. I set the phone face down. I didn't explain, not because I lacked words, but because explaining to people who weren't there is a good way to waste your own life. Neighbors waved from their yards. Some shook my hand hard. Some clapped my shoulder. You did right, they said. I thanked them and asked to borrow their pruning shears. That evening, I went to fix Mrs. Henderson's leaky faucet at the end of the block. She asked how things were. I didn't say much. My son made an important choice, I told her. She nodded, handed me a towel, and said the apple pie was fresh out of the oven. She wrapped 2 slices, one to take, one to eat warm right then. A month later, we had a new frame in the house. Evan and me on the porch, my sleeves rolled to the elbows, the old oil stain on my shirt faded but still there. Evan's arm rests across my shoulder. He's looking straight into the lens and not away. Behind us is the small cactus Ruth planted years ago. I set that frame beside Ruth's portrait. 3 frames now. A woman who taught us love through work, a man learning to stand inside the picture, and a son who just decided who he is. Under the frames, I wrote in pencil, "Respect is the best photograph." I won't bore you with paperwork or the calls trying to drag me into fee disputes. Folks can argue about money until the sun burns out, but one thing isn't up for debate. If you cut your father out of the frame, you cut yourself out of peace. Evan chose peace. Peace isn't free. He paid for it with public embarrassment and long nights staring into the bathroom mirror and telling himself the truth. But he got back what an old mechanic like me has always known. The most trustworthy things are the ones you can touch. Your father's shoulder, your own hands, and a picture that doesn't need a filter. I still keep the manila folder with the $200,000 bill. Sometimes I open it, not to count old numbers, but to remember the road we took around them. I think of that line in the old run of show, "No segment allocated to father of the groom." I click on the lamp, dust the folder, and put it away. I don't need a segment, I need a son. And now I have him back. One Sunday afternoon, the smell of barbecue drifted from the backyard into the kitchen. Evan stood by the grill, turning skewers, and spoke each sentence the way you drive a clean nail into new timber. "I get it now, Dad. Some parties don't need cameras. Some promises don't need a loudspeaker. The future isn't in an article. It's in how long you live right without having to explain." I looked at his hands, the tiny scratches from working in the yard with Miguel. Those little nicks settled me more than any glittering photo online ever could. Night came down and Austin lit up like a giant circuit board, every window a small diode. I stood on the porch and listened to the insects sing, the scent of smoke still caught in my shirt. Evan finished the dishes and stepped outside, leaned his shoulder against the post and asked, "Do you regret showing up at the conservatory?" I shook my head. If I hadn't, who would have been standing at the door to help you see your way? He was quiet, then smiled, a smile that didn't ask anyone's permission. I switched off the porch light and left only a warm, yellow glow inside. On the wall, the 3 frames hung shoulder to shoulder. I stepped close and touched the wood edge. The glass was cool, the frame grain a little rough, the wood warm, and all of it told me life doesn't need a backdrop. The next morning I woke earlier than usual. The first light was thin, birds chattered on the lines. I made coffee and let the smell of the roast open the room. Evan was up early too, wearing my old backpack. He said he was headed to the farmer's market to shoot a set on vendors' hands, then over to a community group to learn about a class they were planning. I nodded and told him to take water. "Want to come?" he asked. I thought about it and shook my head. "I'll be here. Mow the lawn, water the tomatoes, patch that bit of screen. Go on, eat something mid-morning." He said, "Yes, sir," stepped out, then turned back. "I'll be home early. Let's try that new sauce tonight." I lifted my hand and squeezed the air like I was squeezing his hand. I hauled the mower out and pulled the cord, listening to the steady whir of the blade. Grass leaned and released its green scent like a greeting. I clipped a few stems of basil and set them in a glass. Then I opened the manila folder that still holds the $200,000 invoice. The papers lay there, the letters just as cold as before. I didn't recount them. I looked, folded them up, and slid them back in the drawer. I thought again of that line from the program, "No segment allocated to father of the groom." I chuckled and shook my head. I don't need a segment, I need a son. And now I've got him. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts on this story in the comments. Each of your likes, shares, and subscriptions is a great motivation for me to continue writing the next stories. Thank you for listening, goodbye, and see you again.